A billionaire invites his ex-wife to his wedding, expecting to see her broken and full of regret. But when she arrives with quadruplets who share his striking features, the truth unravels before everyone, changing their lives forever. Liam Sinclair sat in his sleek, glass-walled office, a towering symbol of power in the heart of Manhattan. Below him, the city pulsed with relentless energy, cars weaving through traffic, people rushing to chase their ambitions, corporations rising and falling in the unforgiving world of business. Yet within his fortress of wealth and influence, Liam was untouchable. He had spent years meticulously crafting his empire, sacrificing relationships, friendships, and anything that did not serve his pursuit of dominance. He had played the long game, made the hard choices, and emerged victorious. Now he was on the verge of securing his legacy in an even greater way. His upcoming marriage to Evelyn Carter, one of Hollywood's most admired actresses, was more than just a union. It was a statement, a power move that would cement his position among the elite. The wedding, scheduled for 2 weeks from now, was already being called the event of the year, a lavish spectacle attended by the most powerful figures in business, entertainment, and politics. Every detail had been curated to perfection. Yet, as he skimmed through the final guest list, an idea began to take shape in his mind. Something dark, something tempting. A slow smirk curled across his lips. Sophia Bennett. The name echoed like a forgotten melody from a past he had buried long ago. Once she had been his wife, back when he was still a man who believed in love. He had loved her in his own way, fiercely, possessively, but never in the way she had needed. She had wanted things he couldn't give: time, presence, a true partnership. In the end, she had walked away, leaving him with nothing but a few parting words about his ambition to love. Anything more than his ambition. Liam had barely spared her a thought since then. He had moved forward, built his empire, and surrounded himself with people who understood one rule: win or be forgotten. Sophia had simply been collateral damage on his path to greatness. But now, the idea of her seeing him as he was today, at the peak of his success, about to marry a woman who embodied perfection, was too irresistible to ignore. Picking up his phone, he called his assistant. "Charlotte," he said smoothly, "send an invitation to Sophia Bennett. Make sure it reaches her personally." Charlotte hesitated, only for a fraction of a second, barely noticeable. "Sophia Bennett?" she repeated, as if confirming she had heard correctly. "Yes," Liam replied, his voice calm but carrying an edge of something else, something cold. "Let's see if she's curious enough to show up." He ended the call and leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers together. The thought of Sophia walking into his wedding, seeing the extravagance, the perfection, the wealth, and realizing she was nothing but a forgotten relic of his past, was deeply satisfying. He could already picture her, older now, perhaps struggling, burdened by the choices she had made. She would see what she had lost, what she could have had, and it would be too late. She would be nothing compared to Evelyn, flawless, radiant, the embodiment of success, at his side. It would be a lesson in power, in consequence. Sophia had left him, but now she would have to witness just how far he had risen without her. Sophia Bennett stood in her small, sunlit studio, the scent of fresh paint and turpentine filling the air. She was putting the final strokes on a canvas, a vibrant, expressive piece that captured emotion in its rawest form. Art had become her refuge, a sanctuary where she poured out the feelings she didn't always have the time to process. Her life was a far cry from the luxury she had once been surrounded by, but it was full. She had her quadruplets, Noah, Lucas, Elias, and, insert name of fourth child, 4 beautiful boys who were her entire world. Raising them alone had not been easy, but she had never regretted her decision to leave Liam. She had made peace with her past. At least, she had thought so. When the thick, cream-colored envelope arrived, she almost didn't open it. But curiosity, or perhaps something deeper, got the best of her. She traced her fingers over the elegant script, her stomach twisting as she read the words, "Liam Sinclair and Evelyn Carter cordially invite you to celebrate their union." Sophia read the words twice, then once more, before carefully setting the invitation down on her work table. A part of her wanted to throw it away, pretend she had never seen it. But another part of her, one she had ignored for years, felt something else. It wasn't regret. Not once had she regretted leaving Liam. It was unfinished business. Her boys had started asking questions about their father. They were old enough now to notice things, to realize that while other kids had dads, they had only ever had her. She had never lied to them, but she had never told them the full truth either. Maybe it was time. Maybe they deserved to see who their father really was. And maybe Liam needed to see what he had left behind. Taking a deep breath, she folded the invitation and set it aside. She would go, not for him, for them. The estate, a sprawling architectural marvel perched on the cliffs of the Hamptons, was alive with the hum of conversation, bursts of laughter, and the clinking of crystal champagne flutes. Guests arrived in sleek black cars, stepping onto the red carpet that led into the grand hall, where golden chandeliers cast a warm glow over the extravagance surrounding them. Every detail had been curated to perfection. White roses adorned every surface, a live orchestra played soft classical music, and uniformed staff moved seamlessly through the crowd, offering glasses of the finest vintage. Liam stood near the entrance, exuding effortless confidence in a perfectly tailored tuxedo. His sharp features reflected the air of a man who had won at life. At his side, Evelyn Carter was breathtaking in her intricately designed gown, her presence radiating the kind of effortless elegance that only Hollywood royalty could command. This was the moment he had orchestrated, the pinnacle of his achievement, and soon the ceremony would begin. Yet beneath his polished exterior, a part of him was waiting, watching. He hadn't heard from Sophia since the invitation had been sent. She hadn't RSVP'd, hadn't given any indication that she would show up. He told himself it didn't matter. Whether she came or not was irrelevant. And yet, a darker part of him wanted her to walk through those doors, to see the life he had built without her, to witness the perfection that had taken her place. And then it happened. The doors at the far end of the grand hall opened, and a hush fell over the room. Liam turned, his breath catching for just a fraction of a second, so slight that no one would have noticed, except he felt it, deep in his chest. Sophia had arrived. She walked in with quiet confidence, her head held high, her movements unhurried as though she had all the time in the world. She wasn't here to beg, wasn't here to gawk at his success. She was here because she chose to be, and that realization sent a ripple of something unexpected through him. Beside her, walking in perfect step, were 4 children, identical quadruplet boys dressed in matching suits. Their small hands gripped hers as they took in the grandeur of the wedding with wide, curious eyes. She looked different, not in the way time had taken from her, but in the way it had given her something else. Strength, independence, a sense of self that had nothing to do with him. But it wasn't just Sophia that had caught everyone's attention. Beside her, walking in perfect step, were 4 children, identical quadruplet boys dressed in matching suits. Their small hands gripped hers as they took in the grandeur of the wedding with wide, curious eyes. A murmur spread through the guests. People whispered behind their hands, glancing between the boys and Liam. The resemblance was unmistakable. And suddenly the room felt smaller. Evelyn tensed beside him. He could feel the way her posture shifted, her perfectly composed expression hardening at the edges. Sophia hadn't come alone. She had brought them. His children. The realization hit like a sledgehammer to his chest. The boys, Noah, Lucas, Elias, and, insert name of 4th child, were his. There was no denying it. Their faces, their expressions, the way one of them furrowed his brow exactly as Liam had done countless times in the mirror. He had quadruplets, and he had never known. For the first time in years, Liam felt something he didn't recognize, something raw, something unsettling. Sophia met his gaze from across the hall, her expression unreadable. She wasn't here for a scene. She wasn't here to cause chaos, but her presence alone had unraveled everything. Evelyn's fingers curled tightly around Liam's arm, her nails digging into the fabric of his sleeve. She didn't say anything, yet. She was too poised, too trained in the art of maintaining an image to make a scene in front of their esteemed guests, but he could feel the unspoken question burning inside her. Who are those children? Liam's throat was dry. The room waited, eyes flicking between him and Sophia, between the woman from his past and the bride standing beside him, between the 4 boys who were undeniably his, and the man who had just realized that his past wasn't as neatly buried as he had once believed. Then Sophia spoke. Her voice was calm, steady. She didn't raise it, but in the silence of the room every word was heard with perfect clarity. I didn't come here for you, Liam. Her eyes flicked to the boys before settling back on him. I came because they deserve to know who their father is. A cold, sharp silence settled over the room. Evelyn finally let go of his arm, stepping slightly away from him. Her carefully constructed mask cracked, just enough for Liam to see the fury simmering beneath it. This was not how today was supposed to go. This was not how his story was supposed to unfold. But it was too late to stop it now. The children looked at him with expressions ranging from curiosity to apprehension, their small hands still gripping their mother's. Evelyn moved first, inhaling sharply, her body stiffening as she turned toward Liam. Her perfectly sculpted features remained composed, barely. Beneath the surface, fury simmered. She was a woman who thrived on control, who had perfected every aspect of her public image. And yet, this moment, this scene, unraveling in front of the most powerful figures in the city, was an unmitigated disaster. Her voice was low, strained, meant only for Liam's ears, but every syllable carried the sharp edge of rage. What is this, Liam? He had no answer. His throat went dry, his usual composure slipping. For the first time in years he felt unprepared, caught off guard in a way that rattled him to his core. His mind scrambled for an explanation, a way to contain the situation before it spiraled further out of control. But there was no containing this. It was already falling apart. Sophia didn't move. She didn't flinch. She didn't offer an explanation. She simply stood there, waiting. She wasn't here to beg. She wasn't here to seek attention. But her presence alone had accomplished both. A ripple of movement spread through the guests, the murmurs growing. From the corner of his eye, Liam saw the subtle flashes of cameras, reporters already capturing every moment. Someone had sent a message, and within minutes the story would be everywhere. Billionaire Liam Sinclair's secret children, former wife's shocking wedding appearance, scandal rocks New York elite. Evelyn stepped back, just enough to create space between them. A calculated move, a statement. She would not be humiliated by association. One of the boys, Noah, if Liam remembered correctly from the haze of shock, tilted his head slightly, studying him. His expression was unreadable, but there was something sharp in his gaze, something questioning. The weight of that small, assessing look sent a knot tightening in Liam's stomach. Then Sophia spoke again. Her voice was even, controlled, carrying an undeniable power. I don't need anything from you, Liam. I never did. Her eyes flickered briefly to the quadruplets before settling on him. But they deserve to know who their father is. The words cut through the air, silencing even the last of the whispers. She wasn't here to plead. She wasn't here to seek revenge. She had simply delivered the truth, and now it was on him to decide what to do with it. Evelyn exhaled sharply, crossing her arms. She was livid, though too skilled in managing her public image to let it fully show. Her voice, when she finally spoke, dripped with venom. This is unbelievable, she hissed. "How long were you planning to keep this little detail from me, Liam?" He had no answer, because he hadn't known. Here's the revised section with the addition of the fourth child, ensuring all references reflect that Sophia now has quadruplets instead of triplets. And that was the part that shook him the most. He hadn't known, and yet standing here now, staring at the four boys who carried undeniable pieces of his face, it felt impossible that he had ever lived unaware of them. Sophia's gaze remained unreadable, but there was something final in it now. She had delivered the truth, and she was ready to walk away. Evelyn had seen enough. With quiet, dangerous calm, she turned on her heel and strode toward the doors, her head held high, her movements graceful despite the tension crackling around her. The train of her wedding gown swept behind her as she disappeared into the hall beyond. She didn't need to say the words out loud. The message was clear. This wedding was over. Liam stood frozen in the aftermath, the weight of the moment pressing against him like a vice. The murmurs among the guests grew louder now, a mix of fascination, disbelief, and quiet amusement from those who thrived on the downfall of the powerful. Sophia remained for only a moment longer before turning to her sons, giving them a reassuring nod. "Let's go." She had no interest in lingering in this spectacle. She had given them the opportunity to see the man who had been absent their entire lives. But if Liam was unwilling to step forward, she would not force it. As she began to walk away, the boys following beside her, something inside Liam cracked. He had spent years convincing himself that he had no regrets, that every sacrifice had been necessary to achieve the life he now had. But as he watched Sophia and the quadruplets leaving, walking out of the grand hall, away from him, away from everything he had built, a terrible realization settled over him. For the first time in his life, Liam Sinclair was losing something he could never replace. The room had not yet settled from the storm that had just passed through it. The whispers remained, the stares lingered, and yet, despite the grand chandeliers, the lavish floral arrangements, and the meticulously curated image of wealth and status, Liam felt as if he were standing alone in the ruins of what was supposed to be his perfect wedding. He could still see Sophia leading the boys away, their small hands in hers, their backs turned to him, the weight of it pressed against his chest in a way that nothing ever had before. Evelyn was gone. Her heels clicked sharply against the marble as she left without looking back. The crowd parted for her, no one daring to stop the woman whose entire world had just been shattered in front of hundreds of witnesses. And yet, despite everything, it was not Evelyn Liam was thinking about. It was the moment Sophia had spoken, the moment she had stood before him unwavering and declared with such certainty that she had come only for their children. Everything he had believed about his past fractured into something unrecognizable. He had assumed she had walked away and moved on, assumed she had resented him but ultimately disappeared into insignificance. Never had it occurred to him that she had been carrying something far more important than bitterness. She had been carrying his legacy, his bloodline, his sons. He wanted to move, wanted to stop her from leaving, but his feet felt rooted in place, his mind still struggling to keep up with what had just unfolded. The world did not grant him time to process it. The murmurs continued, growing more insistent as the realization spread through the crowd. The bride was gone, and the groom had been left in the middle of a scandal that no amount of money or reputation could immediately erase. A few guests had the audacity to approach, their expressions carefully neutral but their eyes filled with interest. A businessman from a rival firm lifted his glass with a smooth, knowing smile. "Well, Liam," he said, swirling his whiskey lazily, "I'd say congratulations are in order. A father to four, quite the surprise." Liam didn't respond. His fingers clenched at his sides. The businessman was not congratulating him. He was watching, enjoying the unraveling of a man who had always been untouchable. Further away, a cluster of investors whispered among themselves. Snippets of conversation drifted toward him. reckless, irresponsible, words that carried weight in his world. He knew how this worked. In their circles, perception was everything. And the perception of Liam Sinclair had just been rewritten. Charlotte, his assistant, approached with careful steps, her usual poised demeanor faltering slightly as she stood beside him. She leaned in, her voice low but urgent. "Do you need me to do something?" There was nothing to do. The damage had already been done. The reporters, who had been granted access to cover the extravagant wedding, now had their real story. The camera lenses had shifted away from the grand floral arrangements and the star-studded guest list. Now all focus was on him. Liam turned away from the lingering gazes, walking toward the exit. The moment he did, a flurry of camera flashes erupted. Journalists' voices overlapped, questions hitting him from every direction. "Mr. Sinclair, were you aware of the children? Did your fiancée know? Are you planning to take responsibility?" He ignored them. His jaw was set, his body moving on autopilot as he left the venue. The night air was cold against his skin. But it did little to cool the fire of emotions burning inside him. His security team had already ensured that no one would follow, but the damage was done. Tomorrow the headlines would write themselves. Billionaire CEO's wedding ruined by secret family. Liam Sinclair's hidden children. Scandal at the society event of the year. He exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair, pacing slightly as he tried to focus his thoughts. Sophia had left. The boys had left, and he had let them go. The realization sat like lead in his stomach. It should have been easy to walk away from this. He had spent his entire life prioritizing business over personal matters, ensuring that emotions never dictated his actions. He had built his empire on discipline, on decisiveness, and yet the image of his sons, lingered in his mind, refusing to be ignored. Sophia had spoken with finality, as if she had given him his chance and he had already failed. He knew better than anyone that nothing was final until he decided it was. For the first time in years, Liam Sinclair was faced with a problem that could not be solved by strategy, by acquisition, by influence. For the first time in years, he had something to lose. He sat alone in his penthouse, the city stretching out beneath him in a vast sea of lights. He had built this life brick by brick, made himself into a man who controlled everything, business, wealth, influence. And yet, tonight, for the first time in years, he felt as if he had no control at all. The wedding, the event that was supposed to be the pinnacle of his success, had crumbled into chaos. The headlines had already begun circulating, photos of Sophia standing in the grand hall, flanked by the 4 boys who were unmistakably his, had spread across the internet at lightning speed. Speculation ran wild. Had he known? Had he abandoned them? What would happen now? He ignored his phone, which buzzed incessantly with calls from investors, PR advisors, and people who thrived on scandal. He ignored the emails from his legal team advising him on potential damage control. He ignored everything except for the thought looping in his head, unrelenting. Sophia had come, she had brought them, and now they had walked away. The silence of the penthouse felt suffocating. He rose to his feet, restless, pacing the room with tight, deliberate steps. His reflection stared back at him from the floor-to-ceiling windows, polished, composed, but with eyes that betrayed the storm inside. He wasn't a man who dwelt on mistakes. He analyzed them, corrected them, moved forward, but this wasn't a mistake that could be undone with a strategic move or a carefully crafted press release. This was something deeper, something personal. For the first time in years, he thought about Sophia in a way that wasn't shadowed by resentment or detachment. He thought about the woman she had been when they were together. She had been fierce, passionate, unyielding in her beliefs. She had loved him, truly loved him, not for his wealth or ambition, but for the man beneath it all. And he had taken that love for granted. He had expected her to bend to his world, to understand that his time, his focus, his energy belonged to something greater than a relationship. When she had asked for more of him, more of his presence, more of a future that wasn't dictated by corporate deals, he had seen it as a distraction. And so she had left. He had told himself it was for the best, that she had never understood the sacrifices required for success, that she had been weak, unwilling to endure what was necessary. He had believed it for so long that it had become truth in his mind. But now, standing here, his empire at his feet, yet feeling as though he had lost something far more valuable, he saw things differently. She had not been weak. She had walked away not because she couldn't handle his world, but because she had refused to be diminished by it. She had chosen something greater than ambition. She had chosen a life of meaning. She had chosen to raise his children alone rather than fight for a place beside a man who had never made room for her. The thought hit him harder than he expected. She had done it alone. Noah, Lucas, Elias, and 4 boys, his boys. He had missed their first steps, their first words, their birthdays, every scraped knee, every school project, every bedtime story. He had been absent from their lives in a way that could never be undone. Guilt settled deep in his chest, heavier than anything he had felt before. He had thought himself invincible, immune to regrets. But this was regret in its purest, rawest form. He thought of Sophia standing before him, composed and unwavering, as she delivered the truth to his face. She had not accused him, had not demanded anything from him. She had simply given him the chance to step up or walk away. And he had let her walk out that door. His hands curled into fists at his sides. No, this wasn't over. He had spent his life making things happen. He had never been a man who let opportunity slip through his fingers, never let circumstances dictate his future. Sophia may have given him a choice, but that didn't mean she had taken the decision away from him. He turned abruptly, grabbing his phone from the coffee table. His fingers scrolled through his contacts until he found the one he hadn't used in years. Sophia Bennett. His thumb hovered over the call button. Would she answer? Would she even listen? Did he even deserve for her to listen? His jaw tightened. It didn't matter if she wanted to hear it. He had to say it. He wanted to hesitate, but there was no sidestepping this. Liam hit call. The phone rang once, twice. Then it went to voicemail. Sophia's voice came through the receiver, smooth, calm, carrying a weight of quiet resolve. You've reached Sophia. Leave a message. The beep sounded. For a moment he didn't speak. He wasn't a man who left messages. He wasn't a man who waited for responses. But tonight, he wasn't the man he had always been. Finally, he exhaled and spoke. Sophia, I need to see them. A pause. His voice was steady, but with an edge of something unfamiliar, something close to vulnerability. Tell me where. He ended the call and set the phone down. One way or another, he was going to fix this, or at least he was going to try. Liam sat in his car outside the park, gripping the steering wheel as he watched the scene unfold before him. The morning sun cast a warm glow over the playground where children laughed and ran across the grass, the rhythmic creaking of the swings mixed with the occasional bark of a dog, the world carrying on as if nothing had changed. But for him, everything had changed. Sophia sat on a bench, her posture relaxed, but her gaze ever watchful. His sons were scattered across the playground, each engaged in something different. Noah, the boldest, was climbing the jungle gym, testing his limits as he maneuvered from one rung to the next. Lucas, more cautious, was kicking a soccer ball, his movements precise and controlled, as he practiced shooting against an empty goal. Elias, the quietest, sat with a sketchbook balanced on his lap, his fingers moving in steady strokes across the page. Insert name of 4th child, the youngest, was playing nearby, his laughter mingling with that of his brothers. Liam exhaled slowly, his heartbeat heavier than it should have been. He had closed billion-dollar deals without flinching, built an empire from nothing with relentless determination, and yet, stepping out of this car felt like the hardest thing he had ever done. He had seen the way Sophia had looked at him at the wedding, the finality in her eyes, the certainty in her voice. She had not begged him to step into his sons' lives, she had simply given him the opportunity. The choice had been his. And now, here he was, about to make it. He pushed open the car door and stepped onto the pavement, his polished shoes feeling almost out of place against the worn sidewalk. The park was a world away from the circles he moved in, from the boardrooms and skyscrapers that defined his existence, and yet it was here, in this ordinary setting, that he faced the most important decision of his life. Sophia noticed him first. Her eyes flickered to him, unreadable, but she did not rise from the bench. She simply watched as he approached, her expression giving nothing away. He could feel the weight of her silence, the unspoken question hanging in the air. He stopped a few feet away, his gaze shifting to the boys. None of them had noticed him yet. His fingers curled at his sides, uncertain, unfamiliar, and unwelcome. He had spent his life commanding attention, owning every room he walked into. But this was different. This was not a meeting to be controlled, not a negotiation to be won. This was something far more delicate. Noah was the first to spot him. He paused at the top of the jungle gym, his small hands gripping the bars as he narrowed his eyes. For a moment he simply stared, his young mind processing the sight of the man who, up until 2 days ago, had been nothing more than a vague idea, a missing piece of a puzzle he hadn't known he was trying to solve. Then Lucas saw him too, his soccer ball rolling to a stop as he froze mid-step. His reaction was different, less openly scrutinizing, more careful. He glanced at Sophia first, as if waiting for some unspoken cue on how he should react. Elias, the last to notice, hesitated. His pencil hovered over the sketchbook, his eyes, Liam's eyes, flickering between his mother and the stranger standing before them. There was no immediate recognition, no instinctual connection, just quiet curiosity. Liam cleared his throat, suddenly feeling too large, too imposing in this space. He had rehearsed what he would say, gone over every possible opening in his mind, but now, standing here, none of it felt right. Sophia finally spoke, her voice even. "Boy." 4 pairs of eyes snapped to her. "This is Liam Sinclair. Not your father, not Dad, just his name, a title, nothing more." The implication was clear. She would not define this relationship for them. They would decide for themselves what, if anything, he would be to them. Noah climbed down from the jungle gym, brushing dirt from his hands as he stepped forward, unafraid. He was the bold one, the leader. His small frame squared up as he stared up at Liam, arms crossed. "You're the guy from the wedding." He didn't phrase it as a question. Liam nodded, unsure of how to respond. "I am." Lucas joined his brother, his expression more guarded. "Why are you here?" Liam hesitated. There were 100 different ways to answer that question, 100 ways to shape the narrative. But for once in his life, he didn't want to construct the perfect response. He wanted to be honest. "Because I should have been here sooner." His voice was quieter than he intended. Elias remained seated on the bench, watching, his sketchbook still open on his lap. Sophia didn't intervene, didn't push them to respond. She simply waited, letting the moment unfold as it would. Noah frowned, his gaze sharp. "So why weren't you?" The question cut deeper than it should have. It was a child's question, direct, uncomplicated, yet it held a weight Liam wasn't prepared for. He had spent his life dodging accountability, spinning narratives to fit whatever outcome he needed. And he deserved their doubt. There was no sidestepping the truth. "I didn't know about you. If I had, things would have been different." The words felt hollow, inadequate even as Liam spoke them. Noah didn't look convinced. He was young, but he wasn't naive. People find out the truth when they want to. It wasn't a simple observation, it was a challenge, and Liam knew he had no defense. He could have looked for Sophia, could have checked in on her after their divorce, could have cared enough to wonder where she had gone. But he hadn't. He had let go of their past without a second thought, too consumed by his own ambitions to consider that she might have been carrying more than just a broken heart when she walked away. Then Elias spoke, his voice quieter than his brother's but no less direct. "Are you staying?" The question was different. It wasn't about the past, it wasn't about regret. It was about permanence, about consistency, about whether he was just another passing figure in their lives, here today, gone tomorrow. Liam met his gaze, seeing his own reflection in those dark eyes. He thought about the empire he had built, the wealth he had amassed, the countless things he had prioritized over people, and for the first time, he realized none of it mattered if he couldn't answer this question. "I want to." It wasn't a promise, not yet, but it was a beginning. Sophia exhaled quietly, the slightest shift in her expression the only indication that she had expected anything less. The boys exchanged glances, their reactions mixed. Noah skeptical, Lucas thoughtful, Elias unreadable. But none of them walked away. And for now, that was enough. The next few weeks unraveled in ways Liam could have never predicted. His once structured life, built on power and control, now revolved around 4 boys who didn't trust him, a woman who no longer looked at him with admiration, and a reality slipping further from his control with each passing day. For the first time in years, he was uncertain. His world had always been built on calculated moves. Now he was stepping into the unknown, without a strategy to guide him. Their first encounters were cautious, distant. Noah, the leader, kept his guard up, watching Liam with narrowed eyes, never fully convinced of his intentions. Lucas, less confrontational but just as wary, studied him as if trying to determine whether his presence was temporary or real. Elias, the quietest, simply observed, speaking only when necessary, his gaze carrying a depth that unsettled Liam. They were testing him, each in their own way. They did not trust easily, nor did they expect anything from him. And that, more than anything, told Liam just how deeply they had learned to live without him. He wasn't someone they had waited for. He wasn't someone they had spent years hoping would come back. He was an outsider, a name they had heard but never spoken, a stranger who shared their blood but nothing else. And that realization cut deeper than he had expected. Sophia did not interfere. She didn't push the boys to accept him, nor did she shield them from the disappointment that could come if Liam failed to follow through. She simply watched from a distance, letting him figure it out on his own. If she had any expectations of him, she did not voice them. But in her silence, in the way she held herself back, he understood. If he was going to be in their lives, it had to be on their terms. No shortcuts, no grand gestures, just time, patience, and the slow, difficult process of proving himself. The first real breakthrough came unexpectedly. It was a late afternoon when Liam arrived at Sophia's modest home, invited but not yet welcomed. The boys were outside, playing in the yard, their laughter drifting through the air. He watched them from the porch, hesitant, before stepping onto the grass. Noah noticed him first, pausing mid-chase, his eyes narrowing with something akin to suspicion. "What are you doing here?" he asked, arms crossing. Liam met his gaze steadily. "I wanted to see you." Lucas, more diplomatic, glanced toward Sophia, who stood nearby, arms crossed, watching the exchange. She didn't intervene, she simply waited. Elias, as quiet as ever, remained focused on his sketchbook, seemingly indifferent, but Liam noticed how his grip on the pencil tightened. He was listening. Liam hesitated, then reached into the bag he had brought with him. He pulled out a soccer ball and held it out toward Lucas, whose gaze flickered with something unreadable. It was the same brand of ball he had been kicking at the park, the one that had seen better days. "I thought you might need a new one." Lucas stared at the ball for a long moment before finally stepping forward and taking it. He didn't thank him, but he didn't reject it either. A small victory, but a victory nonetheless. Noah scoffed. "You think you can just bring us stuff and we'll like you?" Liam didn't flinch. He met Noah's challenge head-on, recognizing the fight in him, the same stubbornness that had once fueled Liam's own rise to power. "No," Liam said simply. "I don't expect you to like me just because I showed up. But I'm here, and I'm not leaving." Noah held his gaze for a long moment before finally looking away. He didn't argue, didn't press further, but for the first time Liam saw something in his eyes that wasn't just suspicion. It was something closer to curiosity. From that moment on, Liam made a conscious effort to show up. Not just when it was convenient, not just when it was expected, but because he wanted to. He learned their schedules, memorized the things that mattered to them. He found himself attending Lucas's soccer games, sitting on the sidelines as his son played, with a quiet determination that was both impressive and humbling. He watched as Noah fearlessly climbed trees, always pushing himself further, never afraid to fall. He saw the way Elias disappeared into his sketchbook, creating entire worlds with his pencil, lost in the kind of focus Liam knew all too well. He learned their habits, their quirks, the small details that made them who they were. Lucas always tied his shoelaces twice. Noah never backed down from a challenge, no matter how reckless. Elias spoke in short sentences, but when he did, his words carried weight. They did not make it easy for him. They did not welcome him with open arms. But slowly, cautiously, they began to let him in. The real test came one evening when Sophia had to work late, leaving Liam alone with the boys for the first time. It was not a planned arrangement. It was not something Liam had been prepared for. But when she called, asking if he could stay with them for a few hours, he didn't hesitate. He arrived at the house to find the boys already halfway through dinner. Noah barely looked up from his plate. Lucas eyed him warily, as if wondering whether Liam knew what to do with 4 children on his own. Elias remained silent, his gaze flickering between Liam and his brothers. The next few hours were a blur of controlled chaos. Noah challenged him to a game of basketball in the driveway. Clearly more interested in testing Liam's patience than his skills, Lucas focused on perfecting a trick shot with his soccer ball, determined to get it just right before moving on. Elias, to Liam's surprise, sat beside him on the porch, sketching quietly. He said nothing, but he didn't move away either. By the time Sophia returned, the boys were sprawled across the couch, exhausted from the day. Liam sat in the armchair, watching them, feeling something he couldn't quite define. It wasn't victory, it wasn't accomplishment in the way he was used to. It was something softer, something deeper, something real. Sophia studied him for a moment before nodding slightly. "They didn't chase you out," she remarked, her tone laced with amusement. Liam exhaled, leaning back against the chair. "Not yet." She didn't say anything else. She didn't need to. For the first time, Liam knew he had taken a step towards something real, and for the first time, he had something worth fighting for. Weeks passed in a blur, and before Liam could fully process it, his life had taken on a new shape. He still held power, still commanded boardrooms, still dictated the course of billion-dollar deals. But now there was something else woven into his daily existence. His mornings no longer started with urgent emails and high-stakes meetings. Instead, sometimes they began with Lucas kicking a soccer ball against his car tires, waiting for Liam to step outside. Sometimes they included Noah daring him to a game of basketball, his competitive spirit refusing to accept an easy win. And sometimes they were as simple as Elias quietly handing Liam a sketchbook filled with intricate drawings, thoughts the boy rarely put into words. At first, Liam had thought that proving himself to his sons would be the hardest part. He had expected their distrust, had braced himself for rejection. And while those challenges had certainly existed, What surprised him most was the slow, inevitable shift in his own perception of what truly mattered. He had spent his life convinced that success was a solitary pursuit, that anything not directly contributing to his empire was a distraction. But standing on the sidelines of Lucas's soccer games, watching Noah's relentless determination in every competition, seeing Elias's artistic mind come alive in quiet moments, those were things that could not be measured in profit margins or stock value. Sophia had noticed the change, though she never commented on it outright. She remained distant in some ways, still guarded, still unwilling to let herself believe that this was anything more than temporary. She had seen too many promises broken before. She had raised these boys alone, never expecting Liam to return, and she would not be easily convinced that his presence was here to stay. But there were moments, small, fleeting moments. There were moments when something softened in her gaze, when she looked at him not with skepticism, but with something closer to understanding. Instead, she looked away as if trying to guard herself against the weight of his words. Liam leaned against the counter, watching as Sophia rinsed the last of the dishes. "You didn't have to stay this long," she said, still not looking at him. "No one expected you to." Liam exhaled slowly, rolling the thought over in his mind. He could have answered with something flippant, something defensive. Instead, he chose honesty. "I didn't expect to either," he admitted. She finally turned, her dark eyes meeting his. "And yet, you did." He nodded. "And yet, I did." A long silence stretched between them, not uncomfortable, but heavy with meaning. Liam saw the unspoken words in her expression, the question she was too careful to ask. Would he stay? Was this real? Could she trust him not to disappear again? He didn't have easy answers. But he knew one thing with certainty. "I don't want to go back to how things were," he said quietly. Sophia studied him for a long moment, searching his face for the truth. "And what does that mean, Liam?" It meant everything. It meant that his world had changed. It meant that the ruthless, relentless man he had been, the one who had once walked away from her and their children without a second thought, was no longer the man standing before her. It meant that for the first time in his life he was choosing something that had nothing to do with power, control, or ambition. "I want to be here," he said simply. "With them. With you." Sophia's breath hitched slightly, but she quickly masked it, looking away as if afraid to let herself believe him. "You say that now," she murmured, "but what happens when your world pulls you back in, when the next deal, the next opportunity demands your attention?" He could have promised that it wouldn't. He could have sworn that things would be different. But words were meaningless without action. And Sophia had spent too many years raising their children alone to be swayed by empty assurances. Instead, he took a different approach. "I put my company in the hands of my board today," he said. Sophia's head snapped up, her expression unreadable. "What?" "I'm stepping back, delegating, not walking away completely, but I don't need to be in every meeting. I don't need to control every move the company makes." He let out a slow breath. "I've spent my whole life chasing something I thought was the most important thing in the world, and then I realized I'd already lost the one thing that actually mattered." Sophia stared at him, searching for any sign of hesitation, any indication that this was just another strategic move. But there wasn't. "Will now?" she asked finally. Liam ran a hand through his hair, exhaling as he tried to put it into words. "Because I thought I had everything," he admitted. "Then you walked into that wedding with them, and I realized how much I had lost." Her lips parted slightly, but she didn't speak. "I miss their whole lives, Sophia," Liam admitted, his voice quieter now. "I missed their first steps, their first words. I missed birthdays, school events, scraped knees, bedtime stories, and I can't get that time back. But I can be here now. If you let me." For the first time, Sophia looked truly shaken, not angry, not guarded, just uncertain. "You don't get to just decide that," she whispered. "You don't get to walk back into their lives and expect everything to fall into place." Liam nodded, his expression steady. "I know. That's why I'm not asking you to believe me right now. I'm just asking you to give me a chance to prove it." The silence between them stretched thick with years of hurt, regret, and missed chances. Then, after what felt like an eternity, Sophia slowly nodded. "You have a lot to prove," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know," Liam replied, "and I will. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. Trust wouldn't be rebuilt overnight. The past couldn't be changed. But for the first time in his life, Liam Sinclair was willing to fight for something more than just power and success. And this time he wouldn't let it slip away. Thank you for watching this story. If you enjoyed it, make sure to subscribe for more content so you don't miss out on new videos. Don't forget to share this video with your friends and let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Be sure to check out our other videos and stay tuned for the next exciting story.